Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolutely fascinating premise from our sources, one that literally bridges ancient theology and modern quantum physics to try and understand the true nature of human consciousness.
Let's just dive straight into the ultimate question our sources are posing today. They are throwing down a massive challenge to the materialist view that you and I are nothing more than physical matter. Instead, they're exploring a really bold hypothesis. What if ancient scriptures and modern astrophysics are actually describing the exact same phenomena?
To wrap our heads around this, we're going to take a macro to micro journey. We'll start with faith meets quantum physics, move into black holes as cosmic gateways, look at Hawking and the multiverse, explore the body as a suit, dive into the science of souls, and wrap up with We Are More Than Dust.
All right, Section 1. Faith meets quantum physics, ancient texts and modern physics.
We're kicking things off by examining how the speakers in our source material are drawing these incredibly direct correlations between ancient Islamic scripture and theoretical astrophysics. It's wild how neatly they map spiritual concepts directly onto hardcore scientific phenomena. For instance, they look at the Sidratul Muntaha, which translates to the Lot tree of the utmost boundary, a place the Prophet Muhammad is said to have visited during his night journey, and they compare that directly to black holes. Then they map the concept of the seven heavens, or topica, to the brain multiverse theory. And those ancient descriptions of a blinding celestial light at the edge of the universe, they equate those directly to quasars.
This is where it gets super visual. The sources note that the Lot tree, a specific desert tree, is broad at the canopy and narrows all the way down to a single trunk. They compare this physical shape to the exact funnel-like structure of a black hole, wide at the event horizon and narrowing down into an infinitely dense singularity. They're suggesting that these ancient texts were actually using the familiar visual of a desert tree to explain deep space gravitational funnels to people living thousands of years ago.
Moving right along to Section 2, black holes as cosmic gateways, portals to the unknown.
Now, the source theorizes that this cosmic boundary they're talking about isn't just a physical dead end, it's a gateway. And surrounding these gateways is light of unimaginable intensity. In modern science, we call this a quasar, a ridiculously luminous galactic core powered by a supermassive black hole. Our sources are making the case that the blinding light described at the cosmic boundary in those ancient texts isn't just some magical metaphor. They believe it's a literal scientific description of a quasar in deep space.
The sources highlight a specific scriptural quote describing this journey. The sight did not swerve, nor did it transgress. They use this to argue a pretty profound point about physics. Navigating these cosmic gateways, they say, required surviving light and gravity so intense that even beings described in the text as being made of pure light, like the angel Gabriel, couldn't pass through it. The physical and gravitational forces at play were just too immense.
That brings us to Section 3, Hawking and the Multiverse, the Limit of Infinity.
So how does this all fit into the overarching structure of reality? Well, the speakers lean heavily on the work of the late, great Stephen Hawking. You see, earlier models in physics, like eternal inflation, suggested an infinite number of universe bubbles. A lot of people saw that as pure science fiction. But Hawking's final 2018 paper, A Smooth Exit from Eternal Inflation, argued that the multiverse is actually strictly limited in number. Our source takes this massive scientific pivot and uses it to validate the ancient claim that reality consists of distinct, limited layers, specifically the seven heavens mentioned in the Quran, rather than just an infinite, chaotic mess.
Navigating this highly structured multiverse relies on brain-universe theory. Think of it like universes stacked on top of each other, kind of like biological membranes. To move between them, you need a cosmic puncture point. The speakers propose that black holes are essentially the entrance points, and white holes are the exit points spilling out into the next layer. And because the gravitational conditions are so extreme, standard physical matter just can't survive the trip. It requires an entity that isn't bound by standard gravity.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, the body as a suit, the anatomy of existence. To explain what kind of entity could make that journey, the sources use this fantastic analogy. They compare the human body to an astronaut suit. Just like we'd need a highly specialized protective spacesuit to survive on Mars, they argue the soul requires a biological body to interact with the specific physical dimensions of Earth. The human soul in this view is the true conscious entity. It's just temporarily housed inside this biological suit, but it is entirely capable of transcending those physical boundaries that would instantly crush flesh and blood. This completely reframes how we look at human existence. The central thesis here is that your physical body is merely a temporary medium, a vehicle for existing on this specific planetary layer. Your consciousness is the primary entity, and if the body really is just a suit, it completely stands to reason that the consciousness inside it must operate on its own distinct, measurable scientific principles.
Let's explore those principles in Section 5, the science of souls, beyond the physical realm.
To really dig into the science of the soul, the source analyzes out-of-body experiences, or OBEs. You know, that phenomenon where a person perceives the world from a location totally outside their physical body. The sources push back really hard against the standard medical idea that this is just a hallucination or a trick of the brain. Instead, they treat it as actual evidence of the soul operating independently, stepping outside of its biological astronaut suit.
And they cite the fascinating work of parapsychologist Jose Silva to back this all up. Silva was inspired by historical accounts of distant healing, and he discovered that our consciousness shifts profoundly during deep sleep. Looking at Silva's diagrams, the source argues that delta brainwaves act as a literal doorway to the spiritual world. The idea is that our souls naturally detach and travel to other realms during this deep delta state guided by a higher intelligence. What's mind-blowing is how the speakers align this modern parapsychology directly with ancient Quranic texts, which explicitly state that souls are temporarily taken while we sleep.
To really drive this home, the speakers assert that modern science is literally just catching up to ancient wisdom. They point to wild concepts like the declassified CIA gateway process and biocentrism, stuff championed by scientists like Robert Lanza. They use these modern explorations to argue that consciousness operates completely independently of our biology. It's not just a byproduct of brain chemistry, and it is definitely not trapped inside our skulls.
And now, our final stop, Section 6, We Are More Than Dust, the Ultimate Conclusion.
The speakers beautifully wrap up their whole thesis against the materialist worldview using the dying words of the Pashto poet Ghani Khan. As he lay on his deathbed, he basically asked, "Death is calling me. I am not just made of dust, so how will I just become dust?" He realized in those final moments that the physical matter going back into the earth is just the astronaut suit. It's not the traveler. The entity that actually thinks, feels, and potentially traverses the cosmos, that is entirely separate from the dirt.
I think this brilliantly captures the ultimate takeaway from our source material today. When you look at the intricate design of a limited, layered multiverse, and you couple that with the mechanics of human brainwaves, the sources argue it all points to a consciousness that completely transcends physical matter. The earthly suit stays behind, but the true entity, it moves forward.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. If our physical bodies are quite literally just temporary astronaut suits, what undiscovered universe is your consciousness destined to explore next? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the nature of your reality.